They say betrayal never comes from your enemies. The night Thomas Evans disappeared, he didn't slam the door. He didn't leave a note or even pack in front of her. Clara never even heard the suitcase wheels. She only knew something was wrong when she woke up to silence. Deafening, dry silence. No coffee brewing. No news humming from the kitchen TV. No steps echoing through their Chicago apartment. Just the stale smell of her painkillers and the sterile scent of hospital wipes. It had been exactly 14 months since the fall that left her paralyzed from the waist down. One moment she was walking her golden retriever through the snowy streets of Hyde Park. The next, she was face down on the sidewalk, unable to move, her breath visible in the frozen air as she screamed for help. Thomas had held her hand at the hospital. He had promised more than once that everything would be okay, that they'd figure it out. That this, meaning the wheelchair, the therapists, the diapers, the hospital bills, didn't change how much he loved her. But something shifted in the weeks after the accident. Subtle at first. The way his eyes glossed over during conversations. The way he turned his back when helping her shower. The way he flinched at her touch. Then came the lies. The fake fishing trips. The sudden business travel that never existed before. She wanted to believe it was stress. That the man she married, the one who danced with her in the rain on Michigan Avenue after their engagement, was still somewhere inside that tired, resentful man sleeping on the edge of their bed. But the night she woke up to find him gone, it was like death all over again. Not a loud kind of death. Quiet. Cold. Final. Her fingers trembled as she wheeled into the hallway and found the coat closet empty. The spare keys were gone. And then, the final nail. The bank notification flashing on her phone. A withdrawal. $12,000. Their emergency fund. Gone. And with it, so was he. If you think that's cruel, wait until you hear where he went, and with whom. This is not a story about revenge, though it may taste like it. It's a story about becoming a ghost in your own home, then resurrecting yourself from the ashes. About how sometimes the worst, betrayal doesn't come in the form of screams, but in silence, paperwork, and a man you loved looking you in the eyes and saying, "I just can't do this anymore." But before we go deeper, do me a favor. If stories like this move you, if you believe that the truth is sometimes stranger and stronger than fiction, hit the subscribe button. Your support means the world and helps us keep bringing real, raw stories like this one to light. Now, let's go back to where it all began. Clara Evans wasn't the type to fall apart easily. At 44, she had worked 2 jobs most of her life, an art teacher by day, a freelance illustrator by night. She raised 2 boys with discipline and warmth, packed every school lunch, and remembered every birthday. Not just her family's, but her students, her neighbors, even the mailman's. Her life was not glamorous, but it was honest. She and Thomas had met in college. She was sketching outside the campus library. He offered her a coffee and a joke that wasn't funny, but she laughed anyway. He majored in finance but hated numbers. Clara fell in love with his contradictions, how he hated crowds but loved karaoke, how he was introverted but a great storyteller. Their love was ordinary, which made it feel unbreakable, until it broke. When Clara's accident happened, Thomas tried to help, at first. He built a ramp for their front steps. He learned how to change her catheter bag. He even Googled how to give sponge baths. But slowly, his helpfulness turned into hurriedness, then into frustration, then into avoidance. What Clara didn't know was that while she was learning to navigate life without her legs, Thomas was rekindling an old flame from his past. Her name was Vanessa Gray, real estate agent, divorcee, unapologetically ambitious. And unlike Clara, she didn't need help getting in or out of bed. Vanessa lived in Santa Barbara, and their affair had started as a catching-up dinner when Thomas flew out for a finance conference. He told Clara it was a work trip. She believed, Him. Why wouldn't she? She couldn't follow him, couldn't check. Her world had shrunk to 4 wheels and a hospital bed. Trust was all she had left. Over time, work trips became monthly, then weekly. Thomas claimed he had clients out west who needed face-to-face meetings. In reality, he was staying in Vanessa's condo, drinking her expensive wine, listening to her talk about beachfront properties they could one day retire to. And Clara? She was home with her mother, Diana, who had moved in to help. Every week, Clara hoped Thomas would stay a little longer, that he would hold her hand like he used to, that maybe he'd look at her, not through her. But Thomas was already gone long before he left. When he finally told her he wanted to sell the apartment, it wasn't a discussion. It was a declaration. "It's for the best," he said. "You can't stay here alone, and your mother's house in Denver is better suited for your care." Better suited. As if she were a piece of furniture that needed storing. The night he left for good, he told Clara he was taking a break from caregiving, from responsibility, from her. She asked through tears, "Will you come back?" He paused. "I don't think so." That was the last time she saw him. The kids, Ben and Ryan, were shocked, but overwhelmed. Midterms, grad school, student loans. They couldn't drop everything. They flew in for a weekend, helped pack a few things, and left. "Mom, we'll call every night," they promised. But life has a way of getting loud when your pain goes quiet. Quiz time. What do you think Thomas did after leaving Clara? A. Tried to justify his actions by claiming he was emotionally abused. B. Started a new life with Vanessa and told people Clara gave him no choice. Drop your answer in the comments, A or B. The plane had taken off long before Clara realized he was never coming back. Thomas didn't just leave the marriage. He fled it, like a thief in the night, carrying with him not just money and promises, but the quiet erosion of everything they'd built over 2 decades. Clara hadn't even had time to mourn the end of her mobility before she was forced to mourn the end of her marriage. The house they'd shared in Chicago had been sold almost overnight. No negotiations, no discussions. Her name wasn't on the deed, something they never thought would matter until it did. Clara had paid the bills, raised the children, kept the home running like a quiet engine, but legally, the house had always been his. Thomas had arranged the sale through a friend of Vanessa's, a transaction handled so cleanly it felt more like a business deal than the unmaking of a family. With no job, no legs, and nowhere to go, Clara boarded a train with her mother Diana, bound for Denver. The quiet rhythm of the rails against the tracks became a kind of funeral march for the life she used to know. Her mother's house was modest, nestled in a sleepy suburb west of the city. Clara's room was once her childhood bedroom, now retrofitted with a hospital bed, a lift system, and a long mirror that she asked to be covered. She couldn't bear to see herself like that, folded into a machine, her legs unmoving, her spine braced with straps and pillows. Diana did what she could. At 71, she was a retired nurse, strong for her age, but the strain was visible. Her hands trembled slightly when adjusting the wheelchair footrests. Her back ached from lifting Clara, but she never complained. She'd always been that kind of mother. Tough, protective, willing to carry someone else's burden without asking for thanks. Clara spent her first few weeks in Denver, in near silence. Her sons called when they could, short, well-meaning conversations full of awkward encouragements. "You're doing great, Mom," they'd say. "Just hang in there." But their voices were rushed, half-present. One was buried in med school exams. The other was juggling internships and job applications. They were living in a world Clara no longer belonged to. Then, one afternoon, Diana came into her room holding a sleek silver laptop. "Do something," she said gently, placing it on Clara's lap. "Write. Paint. I don't care what. But stop staring at the ceiling." Clara didn't respond right away. But that night, she opened a blank page and started typing. At first, it was just a private journal. She wrote about the fall, the ice, the split-second impact, the terrifying realization that she couldn't feel her legs. She wrote about the hospital, about the tubes, about the sterile smell of helplessness, about Thomas. How he began to disappear not suddenly, but slowly, like sunlight fading behind fog. She wrote without grammar, without censorship. Her grief poured out unshaped, raw, aching. Then, she posted an excerpt on Reddit under an anonymous username. She titled it, "He Left Me When I Couldn't Walk Anymore." She didn't expect anything from it. But overnight, it went viral. Comments flooded in, thousands of strangers offering support, sharing their own betrayals, their own moments of abandonment. Some were paralyzed like her. Some were battling cancer. Some had been left during childbirth, after miscarriages, or in the middle of mental health crises. A tidal wave of wounded voices echoed her own. Clara read every single comment. That night, she cried, not because she was alone, but because she realized she wasn't. The next day, she created a blog and named it Clara's Corner. It wasn't fancy, just a free site on a basic platform, but it gave her something she hadn't had in months: purpose. She wrote every day. At first, about pain, then about resilience, then about absurd little moments, like how her mother had burned the toast 3 days in a row, or how the cat refused to sit anywhere except her wheelchair. She wrote about the past, about her students, about the things she missed, like dancing barefoot in the kitchen or holding a cup of coffee without trembling. Her voice wasn't bitter. It was real, and readers kept coming. Hundreds turned into thousands. They didn't just read. They responded. One woman sent Clara an email saying, "I've been in bed for 6 months with MS. Your blog is the first thing that made me laugh in weeks." A man commented, "I lost my wife and didn't think I could go on. Your words reminded me that grief can coexist with hope." Clara couldn't walk, but she was moving again, through the hearts of others. Meanwhile, Thomas and Vanessa had settled into a rented beachfront condo in San Diego. It was everything Vanessa had dreamed of: ocean views, high-end wine, and a man without any legal baggage, at least on paper. But the fantasy began to tarnish faster than she expected. Thomas couldn't find steady work. The finance firm he'd left in Chicago didn't take him back, and his resume, while decent, was unremarkable in a city teeming with high-performance talent. Vanessa paid most of their bills. She grew tired of his sighs, his self-pity, his constant calls to his mother, whom he blamed for never stepping in to help. He drank more than he used to, slept more, smiled less. Vanessa tried to rekindle their spark with weekend getaways and forced intimacy. But something about Thomas felt hollow, as if the man who once charmed her over wine and piano jazz was now just a shell, orbiting regret. Back in Denver, Clara was blooming. Her mother, in a spontaneous act of nostalgia, bought Clara a pair of knitting needles and 3 skeins of colorful wool. "Remember when you used to knit scarves for your teachers in middle school?" Diana said. Clara laughed. "I haven't done that in 30 years. Still," she tried. Her fingers were shaky, her hands clumsy from nerve damage and months of disuse. But muscle memory is stubborn. Within a week, she finished her first scarf, an uneven, lopsided thing full of dropped stitches and mismatched tension. She posted a photo of it on her blog with the caption, "Not perfect, but neither am I." It exploded. Readers began asking if she sold them. So Clara opened a small Etsy shop, calling it Wheel and Thread. She listed 3 scarves. All sold out within a day. She made more. Ben, her oldest, helped her design a simple logo. Ryan set up the online store. Clara hired a neighbor girl to help with packaging. Soon, orders were coming in from across the country. Then came a message from a producer at a local news station in Denver. They'd seen her blog, loved her story, and wanted to do a feature. Clara hesitated. She didn't want pity. But Diana convinced her to say yes. The segment aired on a Tuesday night. By Wednesday morning, she had 3,000 unread emails and 600 Etsy orders. Among the letters were stories, deep, painful confessions from people who had been forgotten, discarded, left behind. Clara read them one by one. They weren't customers. They were fellow survivors. She began hosting live streams, inviting therapists and disability advocates. She created guides on how to modify crafts for people with limited mobility. She launched a small mentorship program to help disabled women start online shops. And she did it all from her wheelchair, with her mother nearby, knitting beside her like they were 2 women on the edge of something holy. At night, Clara lay in bed, sore but full. Not happy, not in the way most people define happiness, but awake, alive, free. Thomas never called, not once, not to ask how she was, not to apologize, not even to ask for divorce. But Clara didn't need him to. Because by now, she had built something far greater than what he walked away from. She hadn't just survived. She was becoming someone new. It's strange how life can fall apart in a single moment, but rebuild itself in 100 quiet ones. Clara Evans learned this not in grand epiphanies, but in the steady rhythm of yarn sliding over knitting needles, in the hum of a new email notification, in the delicate rustle of packaging tissue as she filled orders from her wheelchair in her mother's living room. What had started as therapy, a simple way to pass long hours and calm the storm inside, had transformed into something she never imagined: purpose, autonomy, and connection. Her blog, Clara's Corner, was now reaching over 100,000 subscribers. The messages poured in daily: confessions, thank you notes, stories of shared grief and survival. Her Etsy shop Wheel and Thread couldn't keep up with demand. Clara was no longer just recovering. She was building something. Ben and Ryan, her sons, had begun to see their mother differently. In the early months after the accident, they had been distant, not out of apathy, but overwhelmed by their own lives, unsure how to help. Now they were her partners. Ben, between medical school rotations, handled website security and customer support. Ryan, who studied business and design, helped revamp the branding, created inventory management tools, and worked with suppliers to get eco-friendly wool. Each week, Clara rolled out of bed, dressed herself with trembling hands, and sat at her makeshift work table beside the window. Her body still ached. Her legs were useless. But her hands had found something to hold on to again. Something worth fighting for. With every scarf she shipped, she included a handwritten note. Handmade with love and resilience. May this wrap you not only in warmth, but in hope. The simple message caught fire on social media. Customers began posting selfies wearing her designs, sharing her story, tagging her account. Within months, influencers and bloggers were reaching out. Some wanted interviews, others simply wanted to say, "I see you, and I believe in you." The turning point came when Clara was invited to speak at a women's entrepreneur summit in San Francisco. The invitation shocked her. "I can't fly," she told her mother, Diana, staring at the email. "Yes, you can," Diana said with quiet firmness. "You've done everything else they said you couldn't. Why stop now?" Clara hesitated. Flying meant more than logistics. It meant stepping fully into the spotlight. It meant letting the world see her not just as a survivor, but as a leader. With her son's help, they arranged for an accessible hotel, transportation, and an aide to assist with travel. Clara rolled into that summit hall 3 months later, dressed in a soft cream sweater she had knit herself and wearing the same shade of lipstick she'd worn on her wedding day. She didn't read from notes. She told her story like a woman who had nothing to lose and everything to share. "I am not whole in the way I used to be," she said into the microphone, her voice steady. "But wholeness isn't about how much of your body moves. It's about what you do with the parts of yourself that still work. My heart works, my mind works, my hands, they still know how to make something beautiful out of tangled threads." The room stood in ovation, not out of pity, out of reverence. That single speech changed the trajectory of her work. Media outlets picked up the story. A short documentary was produced. Clara began partnering with disability advocacy groups and vocational rehab centers, offering online workshops for women with physical limitations who wanted to build their own businesses from home. She didn't charge for the first year. She wanted it to be accessible, especially to women living on disability incomes or single mothers with limited support. Word spread fast. From North Dakota to Atlanta to San Juan, women started writing to Clara, sharing their fledgling creations: handmade soap, stitched journals, crocheted earrings. She featured them in a section of her blog titled Resilience Rising. Every Friday, she hosted a virtual coffee and craft chat where people could log in, sip tea or coffee, knit together, talk about grief, joy, business, and healing. Some joined with cameras off, some shared their full stories, but every single one left feeling a little less invisible. Meanwhile, the business side of Wheel and Thread was evolving too. With Ryan's help, Clara moved from Etsy to her own independent site, improving margins and control. They hired 2 part-time virtual assistants and partnered with a fulfillment center that employed adults with disabilities. Every box shipped was a testament not just to Clara's vision, but to the power of collective resilience. For the first time in her adult life, Clara was financially independent. She didn't need to dip into her mother's pension. She paid her aides. She covered medical equipment upgrades. She even started saving. She knew success didn't mean the pain vanished. Her body was still fragile. The nerve damage caused her frequent insomnia, sharp stabs of phantom pain, and digestive issues she never discussed online. Some mornings, she cried without reason, but those moments no longer defined her. They were just weather, the kind that passes. And perhaps the most unexpected transformation of all? Clara began to enjoy her solitude. She stopped waiting for the phone to ring with Thomas's voice on the other end. She stopped checking the mail for apologies that would never come. She stopped explaining to her sons why their father hadn't called. She didn't need to hate him. She just didn't need him anymore. But not everyone had forgotten Thomas. Diana, always composed, had watched with silent fury as Clara rebuilt herself from the ground up. Though she never spoke his name, her disdain radiated in every polite silence. When friends from her book club asked about Clara's husband, she would simply say, "He's no longer part of the story." In a way, it was true. Thomas and Vanessa, now living in the same San Diego condo they had first rented together, were beginning to feel the weight of consequences. Vanessa had grown cold, distant. Her high-pressure job as a realtor kept her away most days, and Thomas, unemployed, unmotivated, spent most of his time scrolling, drinking, and sleeping. Their conversations had turned transactional. Groceries, bills, shared passwords. The intimacy was gone. Resentment had replaced passion. One evening, while Vanessa was scrolling through Instagram, a video caught her eye. A woman in a wheelchair, surrounded by colorful yarn, laughing during a live stream. The caption read, "Clara's Corner, living beautifully after betrayal." She stared for a long time, then she clicked. She watched as Clara talked about purpose, about rebuilding. about how sometimes the most brutal endings lead to the most unexpected beginnings. Vanessa didn't say a word, but later that night, when Thomas asked if she wanted to plan a weekend trip, she said no. "I think I need space," she murmured, turning away. Back in Denver, Clara's impact was spreading beyond the screen. She was now working on a book, part memoir, part guide for women reclaiming their lives after abandonment, trauma, or disability. Her publisher, a small but growing press run by women, was thrilled. The working title was "Still Standing, Even If I Can't Walk." She had also begun filming a YouTube series about accessible living, inviting guests ranging from therapists to other disabled creators. The comment sections overflowed with gratitude. Subscribers shared how they had started therapy, left toxic relationships, or learned to advocate for their own medical needs because of Clara's example. Clara didn't consider herself famous. She considered herself useful. And in that, she found peace. One evening, after finishing a batch of orders, Clara rolled onto the back porch where Diana sat watching the sky darken into velvet. "You know," Clara said softly, "I used to think this was it. That my life ended when he left." Diana looked at her. "And now? I think he just set me free." They sat there, two women wrapped in knitted blankets, the quiet of the evening a companion rather than a void. Clara wasn't the woman she used to be. She was better. But fate, as always, wasn't finished yet. Because just when Clara began to breathe easy, a phone call came that would change everything again. This time, not from a man who had abandoned her, but from a doctor, with news she never expected. The phone rang on a gray Tuesday morning. The sky over Denver was dull and heavy with snow, and Clara had been halfway through sorting the newest yarn shipment for Wheel and Thread. Diana answered first, her voice polite but cautious as always when unfamiliar numbers lit up the screen. Clara could hear the change in her mother's tone before she heard the words. "It's the hospital," Diana said gently, handing over the receiver. The voice on the line was professional, almost too calm. The oncologist spoke with care, as if each word were a shard of glass. Clara had gone in for a routine scan a few weeks earlier, just a precaution after months of fatigue and unexplained bruising. She had told herself it was nothing. She'd been through enough, hadn't she? But life, Clara had learned, doesn't follow narrative arcs. It doesn't reward you for surviving one storm by letting you avoid the next. They had found something. Leukemia. Advanced. Aggressive. For a moment, Clara couldn't process the words. Her body felt weightless, as if it might float away if she didn't anchor herself to something, anything. She stared at her hands, the same hands that had typed blog posts, knitted scarves, written notes of encouragement. They still moved. They still worked. But inside her, something had begun to collapse again. She didn't cry. Not at first. She just sat there in the quiet, letting the news settle like dust. Later that night, Diana made tea and brought it into Clara's room. She didn't say much, just sat down beside her daughter and waited. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of 1,000 unspoken fears. "I'm not scared of dying," Clara finally whispered. "I'm scared of stopping. Stopping the momentum she had fought to build. Stopping the connection she had created with people who needed her. Stopping before she had fully become the version of herself she was finally proud of." Diana placed a hand over hers. "You haven't stopped anything yet." The treatments began quickly. Chemotherapy, blood transfusions, injections that made her already fragile body feel foreign and exhausted. But Clara kept going. She wrote blog posts from her hospital bed. She filmed short videos in between treatments, her face pale, her voice hoarse, but her spirit unmistakable. Her audience didn't abandon her. They grew. Tens of thousands of new followers found her story, drawn by her brutal honesty and her refusal to sugarcoat what cancer was doing to her. She documented everything, not to be pitied, but to bear witness. The way her skin bruised like paper. The way food lost its flavor. The way she had to relearn what strength meant when her body could no longer do even the things it had adapted to post-paralysis. Support came in waves. Letters, care packages, stories of shared suffering. People from every state, every background. Nurses from Maine. Teenagers from Seattle. Survivors from Alabama. Even a woman from Argentina who'd translated Clara's blog into Spanish, hoping to spread her message further. Ben and Ryan flew in, more often now. They took turns helping with the business, managing Clara's affairs, sitting with her during treatments. They were no longer just her sons. They were her protectors, her advocates. And somewhere, miles away, Thomas Evans had no idea. Until one morning in San Diego, he opened an email from his mother. The subject line was simple: "You should know." Attached was a news article, an in-depth feature from a national magazine. It showed Clara, pale and beautiful in her wheelchair, wrapped in one of her signature scarves, sitting beneath a quote that read, "Even if I have only months, I'll make them count." Thomas read the article twice, then a third time. He sat at the kitchen table while Vanessa bustled around the apartment, oblivious. She had long stopped asking about his past. Their relationship had become one of mutual avoidance. Thomas felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not guilt exactly. He wasn't sure he was capable of that anymore. But a dull, nagging awareness. Regret. Not for leaving Clara, but for how he had underestimated her. He had assumed she would fall apart without him, that she would disappear into the background of her own life. Instead, she had become someone the world admired. When Vanessa asked what was wrong, he said nothing. He didn't want to share this moment with her. It wasn't hers. Days later, his mother called again. This time she told him the truth Clara had been keeping from him. Her condition was terminal. The doctors had done what they could, but the cancer was too far along. The treatments were meant only to prolong, not to cure. "You should go see her," his mother said. "If not for her, then for your sons." He hung up without promising anything. In Denver, Clara was preparing, not for death, but for what came after. She met with lawyers and accountants. She finalized her will. She transferred ownership of Wheel and Thread to her sons and their soon-to-be nonprofit board. She wanted her company to keep empowering disabled entrepreneurs, even if she wasn't around to run it. She asked Ryan to help her draft goodbye letters to her closest friends and supporters. She filmed a final video, not for sympathy, but as a thank you. In it, she spoke directly to the camera, her voice weak but unwavering. "I want you to remember this," she said. "No one gets to define the limits of your life but you. Not doctors, not lovers, not fate. I've been abandoned. I've been broken. But I've also been held and healed and heard. So please, keep making, keep building, keep living. For me. And more importantly, for yourself." The video reached over 3 million views in 5 days. And then, one morning in March, Clara passed away. She was surrounded by her mother, her sons, and the quiet sound of the wind tapping against the window pane. There were no last words, only a long exhale and a soft smile. It was Ben who called Thomas. His voice was measured, emotion packed so tightly it didn't spill. "She's gone," he said. "You should come. Or don't. It's your choice." Thomas didn't respond right away. Then he whispered, "Thank you for telling me." When he arrived in Denver, the air was thinner, colder. The funeral was held in a small chapel filled with handmade scarves, framed letters, and flowers sent from all over the country. The pews overflowed with people Clara had never met in person, but had touched deeply. Thomas stood near the back, unsure where to place himself. He hadn't seen his sons in over 3 years. They acknowledged him with a polite nod, but said nothing more. He approached the casket only once. Inside, Clara lay dressed in her favorite sky blue cardigan, a knitted rose resting on her chest. Her face was peaceful, her hair tucked neatly. There was no room left for regret. After the service, the lawyer read the will. As Clara had arranged, the majority of her estate, including her intellectual property, digital rights, and business revenue, was left to her sons and to the nonprofit. To Thomas, she left one envelope. Inside was a check and a handwritten note. "This is to reimburse you for the caregiving you said you never signed up for. I hope it's enough to finally make peace with what you left behind." Thomas folded the note quietly. There was nothing else to say. He spent the night in a motel outside the city. Vanessa called, but he didn't answer. When he returned to San Diego, he said little, only that Clara had passed. Vanessa didn't ask for details. A week later, she told him she wanted to move out. She had been offered a job in Los Angeles and was ready to start fresh. Thomas didn't argue. He helped carry her boxes to the car, then stood on the curb as she drove away. He walked back into the empty condo and sat alone. The world outside moved on. But somewhere, on hundreds of screens across the country, Clara's voice continued to echo. Her blog remained active, now maintained by her sons and volunteers. Her business grew. Her story became curriculum in resilience training programs. Her nonprofit funded dozens of new micro-businesses run by disabled women. And in the homes of those who wore her scarves or read her words, Clara Evans lived on. Because some people don't just leave a mark, they leave a path, and now it was up to others to follow it. The Denver air was brittle with early winter when Thomas Evans arrived at the small suburban house where his sons were temporarily staying with their grandmother. The sharp wind cut through his jacket as if to remind him he didn't belong there. Not anymore. Still, he stood on the porch for several minutes before finally raising his hand to knock. It wasn't the house that made him hesitate. It was the silence on the other side of the door. A silence pregnant with memory, loss, and judgment. Edward opened it. His face was neutral, not hostile, but not welcoming either. Behind him stood Ryan, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "You came," Edward said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't relief. Thomas nodded, stepping inside. He had prepared 100 possible things to say, apologies, explanations, even a rehearsed attempt at fatherly humility. But none of it felt right in that moment. He had arrived too late for all of it. The house smelled like cinnamon and wool, the remnants of Clara's last autumn. Her presence lingered not in photos or perfume, but in the handmade throw draped. Across the couch, the half-filled knitting basket, the way the home still pulsed with warmth even in the cold, Thomas felt like a trespasser. The family had gathered after the funeral for the traditional 9-day remembrance. Mrs. Diana Evans, Clara's mother, sat quietly in the living room. She looked older than he remembered, not just in body, but in eyes that had seen the rise and fall of her daughter in a way he never bothered to witness. Thomas offered her a weak smile. "Mrs. Evans, Diana, I don't even know what to say." She stared at him. "Then say nothing. Just sit and let it pass." They sat in silence, the only sound the ticking of the grandfather clock Clara had always loved. Later, as dusk painted the sky in fading gold, Thomas took out the check Clara had left him, her final note, her final word. He had read it dozens of times, unsure whether it was an insult, a gift, or something else entirely. The amount was precise, down to the cent. He knew she had meant it that way. That night, he asked his sons if they would consider dividing part of the inheritance with him. Not for greed, he claimed, but because he had once been part of their lives, because he had worked hard once upon a time, because he had been their father. Edward's response was cold, but calm. You were our father in title. But Mom raised us. She kept us grounded. You left when we needed you the most. Not just physically, but emotionally. And then you stayed gone. If she had wanted you to inherit anything, she would have written it into the will. Thomas turned to Ryan, hoping for sympathy. But Ryan's voice was firmer. We're not punishing you. We're just following her wishes. There was no malice in their words, only boundaries. The days passed slowly. Thomas stayed in Denver longer than expected. Not for closure, he would never get that, but because he had nowhere else to be. Vanessa had left him within a month of his return from Clara's funeral. She had realized what he couldn't, that he was a man who had built his life around what was easy, not what was meaningful. There was no bitterness in her leaving, only fatigue. He wandered the city alone during the day, sometimes stopping by the library just to sit among people, pretending to read the newspaper. His phone barely rang. The life he once had, the family, the home, the identity, had slipped through his hands like sand, and now he was left clutching dust. Back at Clara's home, Diana was thriving in her own quiet way. The nonprofit Clara had founded was expanding, and her name had become synonymous with resilience. A feature documentary about her life was in development. Her book, finished by her sons from the notes and audio recordings she left behind, was now a national bestseller. Libraries were ordering it in bulk. Disability advocacy groups used it as training material. Students wrote to her sons, thanking them for their mother's story, saying it changed how they saw their own parents, their own pain. The organization Clara had dreamed of now supported over 200 women across the country. Microgrants, skill-building workshops, mentorship circles. Her vision had come alive in full. She had built something greater than herself. Diana remained at the helm of the family. She refused to move, even as Ben and Ryan offered to take her with them when they returned to the city. This is where Clara is, she told them. I need to be close. She kept the garden Clara loved, even though she had to kneel slowly now and rise with help. She made tea at sunset, lit candles each evening in the corner where Clara's portrait sat. Not out of superstition, but because love, real love, doesn't vanish. It glows. Thomas, meanwhile, had moved back in with his own mother, Mrs. Evans, who lived in a small retirement condo outside of Peoria. She didn't scold him. She never had. But she didn't coddle him either. Her voice was always measured, distant. She had been disappointed in Thomas since the day Clara's name stopped appearing on holiday cards. He tried to rebuild something of his life. Took a job as a clerk at a shipping company, his first 9-to-5 in years. It paid little, but gave him structure. On weekends, he wandered flea markets alone. He stopped checking social media. Every time he saw Clara's name trending, he closed the page. He didn't tell people he had once been her husband. He didn't deserve the association. Years passed. Ben graduated med school, specializing in rehabilitation medicine. Inspired by his mother, he created a mobile clinic model for underserved areas. Ryan built his own design firm and donated a portion of its profits to the nonprofit. They both stayed close, geographically and emotionally. And Clara? She never really left. Her words remained in book pages, in recorded speeches, in whispered conversations between women who had learned from her how to begin again, in scarves worn like armor by people who had faced the worst and kept going, in the eyes of her sons, who carried her ethic of integrity and courage wherever they went. One fall morning, Diana sat with Edward and Ryan on the porch. The wind was soft, the kind that carries memory rather than dust. I miss her more as time goes on, Diana said, her voice thin but certain. Not less. Ryan nodded. Me too. But I also feel like she finished what she was meant to do. Edward looked out across the lawn, where the leaves were turning Clara's favorite shades, amber, wine, and rust. She didn't just survive, he said. She built something no one could take away. And that was the truth. Thomas had walked away with freedom, but Clara had died with legacy. He had chosen escape. She had chosen impact. When Thomas finally passed, alone, years later, it was quiet, uneventful. No obituary mentioned his marriage, no papers printed his name. But in the office of the Clara Evans Foundation, a framed photo remained of Clara, in her wheelchair, wrapped in her own creation, smiling with tired eyes and defiant grace. Beneath the photo was a quote she had written in a letter to a young woman once, after reading her story of abandonment. People will leave you. Life will try to break you. But if you can still create, still give, still love, then you're not broken. You're alive. And some lives, though brief, burn forever. Clara Evans' story is not just a tale of betrayal, survival, and personal triumph. It is a deeply human journey of what it means to rebuild a life after everything has been taken from you. It began with a single, life-altering moment, a slip on ice that rendered her paralyzed and confined to a wheelchair. But the physical injury was just the first blow. The second, deeper wound came not from fate, but from the man she had loved for over 2 decades. Thomas Evans, her husband, who abandoned her in the midst of her greatest need. Left without a home, without mobility, and eventually, without a partner, Clara's world could have easily collapsed. Most would have understood if it had. But Clara refused to be defined by what was done to her. Instead, she made a decision to turn her silence into a voice, her stillness into movement, and her pain into purpose. Through her blog, Clara's Corner, she began sharing her raw truth, not just about disability, but about emotional survival, the cost of abandonment, and the complexity of starting over when you're no longer who you once were. Her words resonated with thousands, then millions. She created a business, Wheel and Thread, selling handcrafted knitted pieces while building a community of support for women with disabilities. She didn't just reclaim her life, she became a symbol of it. But Clara's journey wasn't linear. Just when she had begun to thrive, life tested her again. A devastating cancer diagnosis forced her to face mortality much sooner than expected. And yet, even in the shadow of death, Clara remained true to who she had become, open, honest, generous. She documented her final months, not for sympathy, but to leave behind a roadmap for others facing their own battles. Her story became a movement, her business a nonprofit, her voice a legacy. Her sons, Ben and Ryan, who once didn't know how to support their mother, became her closest allies, continuing her work after her passing. Her mother, Diana, the quiet pillar in the background, proved that the deepest strength often comes from those who speak the least. And Thomas, the man who once claimed he couldn't do this anymore, watched from the sidelines as Clara built an empire out of brokenness. He left searching for freedom, only to discover that freedom without integrity is emptiness. Clara's death was not the end. In fact, it was the beginning of something much greater. Her foundation now uplifts hundreds of women across the country. Her book is taught in classrooms. Her story is whispered among those who've been left behind and wonder if they can still matter. What's the lesson in all of this? That strength is not loud. It doesn't always look like heroism. Sometimes, strength is sitting in a wheelchair, unable to walk, and choosing to create anyway. Sometimes, it's being betrayed by the one you trusted most, and loving yourself, enough not to break. Clara teaches us that our value is not defined by what others give us or take from us. It is rooted in what we choose to become, even when no one is watching. In a world where we are told to move fast, get over things quickly, and hide our pain, Clara did the opposite. She slowed down. She faced everything. And in doing so, she turned her suffering into a story that others could hold on to when the world gave them nothing else. So, how can you apply her story to your own life? Look at where you feel stuck, broken, or overlooked. Ask yourself, not what you've lost, but what you still have. Maybe it's a voice. Maybe it's time. Maybe it's the tiniest bit of hope left inside you. Start there. You don't need a dramatic comeback. You just need the courage to begin again, even quietly. And when life knocks you down a second time, remember Clara. Remember that even with an unmoving body and a ticking clock, she moved the hearts of millions. You are not powerless. You are not voiceless. And no one, not even someone who once loved you, can take that from you without your permission. Now it's your turn to engage. Let's hear from you. Question of the day. If you had to choose what to leave behind in this world, what would matter most to you? A. Leaving a lasting impact through work or service. B. Being remembered by those you love and who love you. Backdrop your answer in the comments. A or B? And how about you? What did you take away from Clara's story? Did her experience shift your view of resilience, forgiveness, or purpose? Share your thoughts in the comments so others can learn from your perspective. Sometimes, one sentence from you can be the lifeline for someone else. If this story moved you, inspired you, or stayed with you, please consider subscribing to this channel. Your support helps us keep sharing powerful, life-changing stories like this one. And if you've made it this far, thank you, truly. Clara's voice lives on through every person who hears it, and now, through you.